Hello, everyone. Okay, I'm an undergraduate in physics. I still don't have a degree. And Rita decided to get me into this project. I don't know how I actually ended up here. But I was doing a research for my thesis project with Professoressa Paola Govoni from the Department of Philosophy, actually. She's a historian of science. So she introduced me to all these topics, and I decided to look into the cultural dynamics at my department. So I prepared a questionnaire. I submitted to all the women professors and all the women in general working at the Unibo physics department. And I also decided to interview some of the professors. And so I'm going to be sharing all the results. But first, I would like to also introduce the main gender bias we have in science. I was prepared not explaining all of these, but I can give a little introduction, and because we're going to see how each of these biases are connected, and also in every part of our department. But yes, we can start with underrepresentation. I think that everyone here knows what we're talking about. Leaky pipeline theory regards how women especially gets lost in the process of the academical studies. So me, for example, I'm one of those. After I get my degree, I'm going to leave physics, probably to move to this topic. Glass ceiling is another interesting phenomenon where women try to get advanced in their professional career, but for societal, society mainly, there are like these invisible barriers that don't allow them to go further. But we're going to look into that later. Implicit bias in hiring. After the roundtable, we should know what we're talking about. Caregiving responsibilities, it's something that has also been mentioned before. Career versus family choice, that's a huge thing that emerged during my research. And self-undervaluation and imposter syndrome is something that I think gets to us all, but mainly women as well. So let's go on. I decided also to give a little historical background because I like to contextualize what I'm studying. So I researched, from my professor Govoni, I researched the historical background of women in science in general. And we can see how there's a trend following social and political and cultural periods. So we start after the Italian unification, with the first women entering universities, and we can see how there's almost a constant trend where women were not that many, of course, but almost 1 in 3 women decided to study science. And this was the science for all period, so there was this huge myth of progress, and there we can see how the trend is going up. And it has a high peak on the 23-24 year, which is curious because in Italy this has been the year where the phases period started. But there's this high peak where women in science overtook women in humanities, which is something that has never happened since 1923. Then we have indeed the fascist era of Italy, where a series of reform basically put aside sciences. So we can see how women disappear slowly, and then they came back during the Second World War, which is a little counterintuitive in my opinion. But that's just because men left. So for practical reasons, women had to study sciences again. Then women and science have been in a good relationship since the Cold War, where we can see the last decrease, because of course, for Cold War, there has been like not a good opinion on science. So especially between young people and feminist movements, and that impacted the choice of women to study sciences. So yeah, the number of women studying, the percentage of women studying has been the same until recent years. And in 2005, we had the first upgoing trends where from 12% women in science have become 18%, which is not that much, in my opinion. And even today, we have the same problem. The choice of women to study sciences are still impacted by social, economical, and cultural pressures. I decided also to look into the gender equality report of UNIBO, which every year is published, and apparently no one's looked at it, but it's really, really interesting. I enlightened all the important bits. For example, these are the students enrolled and enrolled in university in general, broken by gender. So in science, we have a 40-60% in the bachelor and a 46-55 in the masters. But we have to consider this is also biology and chemistry thing, physics, mathematics. So it's a huge pool. If we look specifically in the physics department, these are the statistics of the bachelor. I couldn't find, and I'm a little disappointed, I couldn't find the one for the master's curriculum. Apparently, no one has these data, and I think it's not a good thing, because I would be really interested into looking how many women choose to study theoretical physics over applied physics, over physics of matter, and etc. So we can see that from the 40-60 or 46-55%, we dropped to a 23-33-25%. So women in physics are very few. And of course, there's a phenomenon we were talking about, the leaky pipeline theory, where women slowly disappear over the course of the academical studies. Yeah, so for reference, these are the PhD students enrolled at the first year. And again, mathematics, physics, and chemistry and astronomy are all the ones I was referring before. By every cycle, women in science are not, there's not such a huge gap, for example, compared to engineering, which is really disappointing to me. But yes, it is what it is. And I decided also to look, of course, at the gender pay gap. And there are not many data because, of course, Alma Laurea, which is the survey process of all the graduated people in Italy, have data until 5 years after graduation. So after 5 years of graduation, there is a gender pay gap average for all the person enrolled at UNIBO, which is around 200 euros per month. In science, it's not that bad. It's only 100 per month. And my opinion is that the sociology value is the worst one, since there are many women studying sociology compared to science. So for reference, I also decided to include the typical academical career of people at University of Bologna. Ignoring the first column, because it's resident in Emilia-Romagna, which is the region of Bologna, ignoring this first column, we can see how students enrolled in the first year, we have many more women. Women in university overtook men in 1992. Since then, many more women have been studying at universities. But we can see, as I was saying before, this scissor, where women slowly disappear, and men, of course, in percentage became more. So there's to the PhD, we still have almost 50%, and then mainly at the apical roles, women are almost non-existent. And this is the typical academic career for all university. This is the one in science. And it's even worse because women already start, there are less than men. And again, we drop at the last step of their career. For reference, these are the absolute values of teachers, the teaching staff at Unibo and at the physics department. And we can see how women in total are less than half of men's, especially at the full professor category. There's a huge gap in numbers. I invite everyone to go and look at all these data because they're really interesting in general. I also decided to look into the statistical of the Italian Physics Society, just for reference to see also how the rest of Italy is doing. And unfortunately, I couldn't find a report in English, so bear with me, I'm gonna have to translate all the tables. Also, I haven't said that, but I'm talking, of course, in binaries, because this is how research is made up till now. But in women, I would like to include non-binary people and such. So we can see how, in general, physicists, women and men in total, women are always at around 20% of the total over men, yes. And something that emerged that was really interesting, as you were also saying before, I think, is how we have an imbalance over the roles that women have in congresses. So, for example, I think this table is more representative. We can see how women chairs and women invited speakers have a huge imbalance compared to men. Data for men and women are completely inverted. Whenever there's more chairwomen, there's also less invited women. So we can say that chair roles are a little more the caregiving roles. They are like the more organizational side of the work. They have to introduce, they have to keep the dialogue going, while the invited speakers are, of course, we can say more prestigious role, because they're actually talking about maybe the scientific stuff. So I asked to my professor at Unibo if they have seen this phenomenon happening, and I decided to report the quotes I like the most. Every point is someone different speaking. And they've told me that, not to generalize, but almost always, if there are meetings, events, or conferences, the men handle the scientific part, while the bureaucratic and organizational tasks are delegated to women. It's not done consciously, but it happens. Also, this really sinked in, also because of what Barbara was saying earlier, around the fact that we should care for our community. And that's something that women tend to do way more often compared to men. So this professor told me that being part of a community also means taking responsibilities for it and caring for the community's well-being, like in a family. Unfortunately, when we do that, we end up being entrusted with even more organizational housework. This professor, I love this professor, she told me that this happens and maybe women have a greater aptitude for organization. I was like, yeah, maybe. She told me that she's a product of her time, just to contextualize it. And the funny anecdote about this is that we were in her office while doing the interview, and she had the most disorganized and untidy desk I've ever seen. And just next to us, there was the desk of her colleague, male colleague, and that was the cleanest desk I've ever seen. So I was like, Prof, are you sure that women are have much more of an aptitude for organization? And she was like, yes, well, I can find everything in my mess. So I was like, okay. Something that also, everything I've been looking into is deeply problematic in my opinion. But something that also I've never noticed it before until I approached these topics, is how women concentrate in specific fields of studies. For example, this is a table also coming from the Italian Physics Society data. And we can see how they decided to create a femininity ratio, so men over women in congresses and in the different fields of study. So I have to translate it for you. I did, it's written here. But section 2 is physics of matter. And we can see how there's a huge trend of men over women. When we see the 0-0 means there's no women, of course. 0-50, it's 50% women, 50 men. And when there's a red box, it's because there's a majority of women. So we can see how physics of matter and applied physics have a constant trend of basically more and only men. While, of course, in medical physics, biophysics, and teaching in history of physics have a way more presence of women. These exceptional red boxes are here just because in those years there's been a major breakthroughs, discoveries made by women. So they were, of course, required to be there. But don't worry, because the next year they disappeared again. Yes. So I started wondering why there's such a huge imbalance. Of course, women are more influenced to think that we're more done to be caregivers. So maybe, yes, of course, we end up in those fields, but that cannot be the only reason. And I asked my professors again, the question, I didn't write it in a good English, but my question was, why data analysis but not theoretical physics or hardware studies? So in my spectrum, like theoretical and completely practical, and in the middle there's data analysis. Yes, data analysis is a huge field, but why? There's this, I don't know, imbalance. And the answers I got were, yes, women are much more encouraged to think that caregiving jobs are more suited to our abilities, and the percentage of women in data and medical physics is disproportionate compared to that in theoretical physics, and it's part of Italian narrative. So again, culture plays a huge role in what women choose to do. Someone else told me that in mathematics, counterintuitively again, in mathematics there are more women enrolled in the first years than physics, especially theoretical physics, originally because the idea was to go into teaching. So maybe mathematics, again, more of a caregiving role than physics. Moreover, on the other side of the spectrum, applied physics might seem more difficult compared to biology and other sciences, which still involve lab work. In my opinion, women tend to move towards data analysis because it is seen as a more standardized type of work. So it's something that requires diligent and precise people. And these adjectives are adjectives that are always attached to female figures, while the rest is considered creative work, unconsciously associated with men. And she started noticing this trend while reading recommendation letters for people she had to hire. And she saw this trend where adjectives were always like diligent, attentive for women, explosive and creative on the other. And that's something that, of course, influences the choices of fewer girls. Something else that emerged, which I really decided to look into, is how different people decide to approach abroad studies and research. Because this professor replied to me that to work on an experiment, you need to go where the experiment is conducted. And she watched her male colleagues who had just started a family move to the site of the experiment, taking their wives and children with them. But I wonder, if I had kids and a husband who maybe has a job, and I told him, okay, I have to go abroad for an experiment of 8 years. Now you come with me. What would have happened? And as a physicist, since she has no data, she doesn't know if that would have been possible. In my opinion, when you have no data over something, it's already a data. So yes, I've been asking again about jobs abroad and studies abroad, and they reported again the same phenomenon happening. So male speakers were accompanied by their wives. That's something that happened majorly in the past, but sometimes it still happens here. So they were accompanied by their wives, while the opposite was extremely rare. And sometimes they even took the opportunity for a vacation. Something else that came up is the fact that one of the aspects for a professor when they apply for a qualification to become an associate or a full professor is that they have to be able to be a visiting professor, so spending a long time abroad. And it's taken for granted that the family won't follow you if you're a woman. So for women, it's a decision that has huge impact. And she doesn't think it's fair. She could never actually step and decide to actually try and be a full professor. She couldn't do it. And she doesn't think it's fair because the job she's always wanted forces her to choose between work and family. Also, looking at the Italian Physics Society data, we can see how we have 3% more women working abroad after 1 year after graduation. And we have a complete drop to a less than 15% after the 5th year after the master graduation. And there wasn't an explanation for why this happens. In my opinion, was women decide maybe to start a family. And for this sad reason, women go back home. As a very problematic aspect, which is what I was saying before, women decide to self-limit themselves. So maybe sometimes they don't feel up to it, they don't feel adequate enough. More often they have to balance private life and work life. So they refrain from applying to jobs or they turn down responsibilities. And as something that we all think we know, I think that we all know, yeah, it's that many doctoral female students drops out. And this is a story one of the professors told me, that when she was pursuing doctorate, all of the other girls that were with her quit. 2 girls for family reason. Another one was pregnant during the competition, like her, and that was to me absurd. And she also gave birth the same day she had the exam for the competition. And this girl did not pass, and her supervisor told her that she had other priorities since she was pregnant, and that she made a mistake for which she did not manage to succeed. So she basically was forced to leave. Regarding the so-called imposter syndrome, I doubt myself most of the time. She was asked to go 6 months abroad to Cambridge, and she said yes, but she regrets it, and then she's very happy, and then she regrets it because she doesn't feel she's up to it. Of course, she only said yes because her kids are now grown up. Otherwise, she would have turned down this opportunity. And something else they've said to me is that to avoid putting ourselves in a position to give up later, we eliminate the problem beforehand. So I have to ask myself, how will it impact my family? Can I still pick up my child from school? Can I spend a weekend with them? And something that this causes is that when you have to look after children, maybe you have to get off work earlier, which means you produce less, which means you have less curriculum, which means you start disappearing, maybe, or in the, publish or perish process. And it's also because research doesn't wait for you. So after maternity leave, I thought about quitting because I didn't think I'd be able to work after the hormonal progression she has during maternity. It took me months to recover and just as long to reconnect with my work. She thought she would never have been able again to start her work. just because during maternity regression, during hormonal regression, she lost completely her mental abilities that fortunately came back with time. And this professor, which is the same from the desk, and the professor I love, she told me it's not because they were women, but because they didn't feel up to it. In my opinion, it's linked, of course. They didn't feel prepared enough, but how can you know if you don't even try? One morning I stood in the front of the mirror and asked myself, do you really think that you're dumber than the others? And that was, yes, agree. Okay, so we're almost done. These are the results of the questionnaire I submitted. Yes, easy. I told you, you were the first person, so I read all your answers. Yes.
You're not the physicist.
So this is the pool. Still, I of course prepared the questionnaire in Italian, and this was translated by Google, so it's a very poor translation. And again, you're gonna have to refer by me. So we have around 50 answers to this questionnaire, which are huge, knowing that almost no women works in the department. And I love the response. So many professors and doctorates write emails to me to say, oh, thank you, I want to know more and stuff. And I'm glad that there's a nice place you can talk about these things in our departments, even though it's not perfect, of course. So most of the people, also almost half of the people that replied were doctorates, and then I don't know how to translate ascenista. Postdocs. Yeah. And yes, so full-time researcher, full professor, associated professor, so I have all the categories you could find. I asked, how many times have you thought about giving up your career? And I'm glad to see like very few people told me that they thought about leaving very often, and then almost everyone told me that they have never thought about it. But we can see an opposite trend when I've asked the question, how many times have you thought you couldn't make it? So compared to this, we have this. So a lot of people have thought they couldn't make it, but they didn't think about giving up their career, which is surprising to me because every time I thought I couldn't make it, I told myself, okay, you have to leave physics, and that's what I'm gonna do. How many times have you thought you didn't deserve the success you achieved? It's almost constant in my opinion, so the majority of people are in the between, which I guess it's a fair result. Do you ever feel crushed between work and private life? And I think there's no need to comment this result, which is something that's, once again, very problematic. So we're at the end. I didn't translate all of the answers, but I'm going to tell you why in a few seconds. Have you ever received inappropriate comments, attention, or proposal in the department? This was the tough question, in my opinion. Almost everyone, thankfully, said no, but still, almost 25% of people said yes, which is not nice. The other answers I'm going to translate in the next one, which is this. So I have asked, in general, what do they think about the climate in the department? And they've told me that, like, there's a nice balance between all the answers. Someone thought the department is way behind about gender issues. Some told me that it's slowly improving, on the right path, open, way ahead. Then, in this very small percentage of people here, someone told me there's a student who harasses people in our department, and I didn't know what to do. So I reported it, of course, and they told me the same thing that they told them, which is everything they could have done, they did, and the situation, of course, didn't change. So the only thing I felt like doing was telling my professor while doing the interviews, and they told me that they were aware of the situation, but something that happens in our department is that the university system as a whole is not supportive. It's as if it absorbs this perturbation by dissipating them, and it's absolutely unequipped to handle this kind of situation. She told me that situation where you could feel the dominance in their environment happen, like a feast on the table. And after another even worse incident happened, many people came to her to offer support, but again, the department as a whole could do nothing. It's like the department, the society, the system waters down this kind of problem until they slowly disappear. And something else is, I first realized that there was a huge problem, again, regarding gender issues during a meeting at the physics degree program committee, so a very official meeting, where I was the program coordinator and we had gathered statistics to discuss the matter. It was one of the worst moments. I remember it perfectly. We weren't looking at each other in disbelief. After the barroom jokes, which I didn't expect, it ended up, there's nothing we can do, it's society's fault. The problem is, we are part of society and we can do something. In our department, gender issues have been swept under the rug for a long time. When the first gender report came out, which was in 2015, I think, during a department hearing by the director of the department, the question arose as to why there were so few female professors. The director, somewhat caught off guard, responded by saying that perhaps it's because women don't want to study physics. This is the ending of my presentation. And this is the bibliography. I have never written a bibliography. I hope it's all right, in case you can text me.